And then I'm going to start, as with all of our programs, with the land acknowledgement. Again, this is a very strange time because we're all around the world and most of us will find ourselves on unceded Indigenous land, but I do want to kind of root ourselves in Sierra Nevada University, located in Incline Village, which is on Washoe land. The Washoe people have lived, thrived, and stewarded that land for long before the school was there and will continue to do so into the future. And so we acknowledge the Washoe people for the care of this land and pay our respects to their elders, both past and present. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Julia to talk a little bit more about the MFA program.
Thanks, Santha. Hi, Megan. Hi, Sherry. I just want to welcome, as I do, each lecturer, all of you to the second faculty artist lecture of the MFA-IA Winter 2021 residency. We're excited to have both current students, former students, and faculty and friends joining us today, and hopefully throughout the rest of the next week and a half as we have other excellent people presenting. We've instituted we've offered a new feature as part of our public lectures where we're offering the role of introducer to one of our current students, should they like to take on the task of doing a little bit of research around our visiting faculty who are lecturing and then presenting themselves to us. We offered them that opportunity. So today I would like to introduce, Hans is going to introduce me. I'm going to introduce Mary Jays, who's going to introduce Joseph DeLappe, our esteemed lecturer. So without further ado, Mary.
Thanks, Julia.
Got it.
I'm just going to read a little bit here. So I'm Mary Jays. I'm in my third residency. So I'll be presenting at Midway Conversation next Wednesday. And I was excited about this opportunity to introduce an artist this residency, and also really happy that it's Joseph DeLappe. As we progress through our second remote residency due to pandemic, I found that screens and our ability to play within them to be a hopeful practice and resilience. And so I'm thankful that Joseph DeLappe will be sharing his works, exploring game art, performance, interventions, actions, sculpture, and installation, among many other categories. Joseph is teaching a course this residency named Remote, Mediation, Performance, and Making at a Distance. And I hope to see the projects from his class evolve at our peak session. Joseph DeLappe is a native San Franciscan. He has been working with electronic and new media since 1983. He is currently based in Dundee, Scotland, where he is professor of games and tactical media at Abertay University. His work in online gaming performance, activist political art, participatory and social practice, sculpture, and electromechanical installation have been shown throughout the United States and abroad. He has developed works for venues such as Eyebeam Art and Technology in New York, the Guangdong Museum of Art, China, and Transitio MX, Mexico City, among many others. Creative works and actions have been featured widely in scholarly journals, books, and the popular media. In 2006, he collaborated with the Biome Collective in Dundee to create Killbox, a game about drone warfare that was nominated in 2017 for BAFTA Scotland in the Best Computer Game category. In 2017, he was awarded Guggenheim Fellowship in the Fine Arts. So that's Joseph DeLappe. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary, for that lovely intro. It's great to see some friends past and new, and I'm really excited. My mom is here. She's watching from San Francisco. Hi, Mom. Yeah, so I'm gonna switch to my sharing here. I can remember. There it is. Seems to want to rotate from being at the top of the screen or the bottom of the screen. Okay. You all see that? Great. So first off, I want to thank Julia and Russell for inviting me. It's really great to be part of this program. I'm gonna, this is probably my long form lecture, and I'm gonna try to do all of this within an hour or thereabouts, and then have some time for a question and discussion. I'm gonna show you a lot of work. A little bit of background. I grew up in San Francisco, went through Catholic schools there, landed up going to City College in San Francisco to get my associate arts degree to become a graphic designer illustrator, then went to San Jose State University to study graphic design this was in the early 80s. During this time, I was I probably was really sort of politicized by the Reagan era and by my enthusiasm for the hardcore punk scene in San Francisco, the Dead Kennedys, Flipper, all that fun stuff. And the sort of DIY attitude of such was really crucial to the development of my practice. Yeah, and kind of fell into a really interesting program in 1983 at San Jose State University. The Cadre Institute was one of the first computers and art design programs within the California State University system, and it was just really interesting. I had very little interest actually in computers. Sounds like someone's got a Roomba going. I really have never been enamored with computers or technology, actually quite skeptical of it and remain so. And I think that comes through in my work, but it's a means to an end, and kind of the work sort of examines that relationship we have with technology on a certain level, and politics and culture and all kinds of issues. But I'm going to start with some work, some early work that and sort of take you through a kind of lineage from the late 90s to the present to kind of show you how I got to where I am. This is a piece from 1997. I'm a maker. I've always been a maker, building train sets and models in my basement bedroom in San Francisco. And in the 90s, I was running computer labs at University of Nevada, Reno, and at the time we were using these old school desktop mice with the mouse balls in them and all that, and they would get all clogged up and they would die, and you'd have to get new ones and all that. And I'm a bit of a pack rat, and I just started keeping all these mice as they died and thought, okay, these are useless now. What do I do? So I started making sculptures out of these used desktop devices. And this is actually a heart mouse that I actually created from two apple mice, cut and glued together, painted pink. I ended up giving this to my college roommate when he married the woman he met on the internet. In the early 2000s. So it's still on the wall of their house, which is quite lovely. Did a whole series of mouse works. This is probably one of the more provocative pieces. This was about the time when I was actually starting to play computer games just for fun. And that is my actual joystick there on the right that I used to play games like TIE Fighter and that kind of stuff, Star Wars. And it's such an obviously phallic device designed by men. For men to play games, right? And it just seemed like it needed a heteronormative kind of partner, and just was this idea. And I modeled a vagina onto the surface of the mouse, painted in pink, and I would show these together. And I'll just leave it at that. But the curious thing about this is, like now, this was well before these kind of mice existed, and I suspect you'll never look at this the same way again. And I think these do have a kind of purposefully kind of erotic kind of nature to them to keep us engaged with them. Anyway, but let me move on because I've got loads of work to show you. Some other works. This was a kind of a collection of well over 1,000 mice that I, both from keeping them from the computer labs, but also would go to this place in Cupertino called Weird Stuff Warehouse that I had found when I was in grad school at San Jose State. And they would have boxes and boxes of discards from the computer industry. And it's a weaving, hand woven together of used computer mice. And I looked at this as kind of a wry tribute to the Luddites of 19th century England who revolted against the Industrial Revolution, and think of it as kind of almost like a memorial to cubicle culture and work, and also our kind of embrace of sort of faux religiosity surrounding computing in general. it's a huge piece. It's very heavy, but it really is something that was very, very physical, putting this work together as well. But probably the most pertinent to this discussion tonight is this piece, which is, this was the only functional mouse I made in this entire series. This is called the Artist Mouse, and it's what you see, which is essentially an appendage for my desktop mouse, which allowed me to attach traditional artist materials to the mouse. When I made this, I was like, okay, I got to use this. What am I going to do with this? And at the time, I just had gotten into playing kind of first-person shooter games on my computer, and this was before they were interactive on the internet. So this was a single-player, a game called Unreal, very popular title. And what I decided to do was I thought, okay, what's going to make interesting marks? So what about playing this game? And so what I did was I replaced my mouse pad with 10 by 10 inch pieces of rag paper, and using an ebony pencil, which for my drawing class days, that's always the darkest black you can get. I played levels of the game and used the mouse, and it created these really crazy marks. And it became this kind of mapping of that experience of distraction and play. And I just, I couldn't make these marks if I tried, and they just kind of fascinated me. From there, I spent several years recording nearly all of my computer time using this device. And one thing to understand about this device is when you attach a pencil and a sort of spring-loaded arm and this thing, not only was it heavy, but it creates a friction so that it was no longer a kind of smooth experience of mouse activity. It was very physical, and my arm would ache after using this. And but this is these just some examples, like on the bottom right there, each of those represent about a month of all of my computer time. Those are about 32 inches wide each. The one on the left, I did that at the desk at my desk at UNR when I was chair, which was a very boring job, and you kind of answering emails and doing memos and all that kind of stuff. But it was just everything: playing games, internet, grading papers, writing papers for conferences, etc. I just became this kind of obsessive way of recording my activity. In the midst of all of this, I was still playing games and kind of following the lead of my students, because my students were playing these games. Like, what are these games? I started checking them out. I just got really kind of obsessed with them at a certain point. And what you're looking at here is a screenshot from what was my first time actually performing in a game space. I started incorporating, I thought, how, these spaces, these online spaces and these shooter games are like little theater sets. They're quite amazing. And I thought, okay, what if I thought of these spaces as a new type of public space? It's on the internet. The hyperbole was, that this was this free and open space that was going to change the world, and you could do anything in here, And so I thought, okay, what if you went into this game space and rather than kill, you recited poetry? And so I used the text messaging system, which was the only way you could communicate with other players at the time. They weren't microphones and all of that. And my avatar's name was Allen Ginsberg. And I literally sat in my basement studio and projected the game space and typed from Allen Ginsberg's book-length poem, Howl, word for word. It took about 3.5, 4 hours. And the rules were I would not shoot. I would simply reincarnate after I was shot and keep typing. Other players were like, oh, poetry and killing, this is cool, and that kind of stuff. And I had no idea. This was an experiment. I had no idea whether it's interesting, whether it was significant. It seemed actually kind of silly and sort of dumb, but it intrigued me. And it turns out actually at the time it was one of the first examples of an artist kind of engaging shooter game spaces for performance. And I touched on something that just kind of stuck with me over the years and evolved to quite an interesting place. From there, and intermixed in here, I'm doing lots of physical work as well, which I'm not showing you, but I'll show you a couple of pieces in a moment here. But this was a screenshot from a project I did with some of the students in my program at UNR. This was called Quake Friends, and Quake was a hyper-violent title that was really popular at the time. And what I did was invited these students, and we went into this space, each of us as one of the characters from the TV show Friends. and so Rachel, Chandler, you know, et cetera. And rather than play the game, we each typed dialogue from an entire episode from the show Friends. And this was a really insane experience. This was the second staging of this project in the Shepherd Gallery at UNR. And we had each character's point of view, and we were also reading the dialogue as we typed it. So it was this really stilted kind of talking. We all went into the same server space for this Quake experience, and we're just getting blown away the entire time, but performing this, this mashup of Friends and Quake, which was quite intriguing. One of the curious things that happened with this is I was really excited that the piece got written up in the New York Times by the then Arts Online editor, Matt Mirapol, about 3 days before the performance. And it was just like, that's one of those things as an artist, I was like, wow, that's awesome. That's like millions of eyeballs looking at, the idea behind this project and what I'm doing. But that also attracted the attention of the legal team for Warner Brothers Television, who contacted me immediately, and kind of a cease and desist kind of situation that I was using their copyrighted information, to remove all Friends material from my website, et cetera. And it was very interesting because I went to the university council to seek advice, and of course they panicked, and their first instinct was like, do everything they say, and I am aware of rights in the United States in terms of fair use and satirical work and that kind of thing. So I pushed back against that, and kind of went away. But it was very seductive in a way, getting that kind of, I would say this is probably the first work that I did that kind of went viral, and there's something really seductive about that, but also I think significant in terms of my efforts beyond this project to sort of seek to utilize that as a way to kind of disseminate ideas and the work. This is a physical work that I created in the same time frame, and it's a Nevada piece, so I thought I would show it. I don't usually show this work, but I made this work specifically for the Media Gallery at the Nevada Museum of Art, which was then still relatively new. It's a kinetic work. I hope you can see this video. It's a kinetic work, a giant Ferris wheel with a carefully modeled diorama of a roadbed from a section of the road just past Fallon on Highway 50, and at the time, a very costly networked video camera that actually fed this live feed into the gallery, projected on the wall, but also onto the internet as a live stream, which was very difficult to do at the time. Now it's rather typical. This piece, I was thinking about movies, films, David Lynch, highways, and this was also a kind of melding of my physical work and my interest in online practice. I went from there, into kind of getting, this is just after the invasion of Iraq and all the nonsense surrounding that, and I've been collecting media images about the war, and was working on a piece in my basement in Reno where I had four of these streaming cameras set up with a switcher box, and I was building miniature dioramas based on imagery from the war, and this was to be a 24/7 live streaming project called War Movie. And I had been working on this project for about a year and a half, and then had a devastating flood of my studio. This was in 2005, New Year's, and when 100-year flood, which now it seems to come every couple of years, and it just trashed my studio, and it just this was devastating on a number of levels, but it also kind of freed me to go and engage some other ideas that I had. And I'm sure most of the artists out there, how it is when you're working on a big project, and it's like you have these other ideas, and you're like, no, I need to finish this. And what this flood did was it finished this project for me, and I could move on to these other works, which I think actually were a bit probably more significant as things bared out. Around the same time frame, I would say, is when I became sort of fully politicized as an artist. This was after 9/11 and the invasion of Iraq, which was erroneously based on the attacks of 9/11, et cetera. what you're looking at here is a screenshot of the website for the World Trade Center Site Memorial Competition, which was kind of a wonderful thing. It was actually an open competition worldwide, and there were 5,201 proposals. On this website, you could access an entire database of all of the submissions based on country, based on theme, etc. And I thought, wow, this is actually quite cool that they're sharing this, that they're doing this, and yeah, of course they should be memorializing this event. But I couldn't help but think at the time, this was less than a year into the invasion of Iraq, things were starting to go sour. And I was thinking, okay, so by now many thousands of Iraqis have been killed beyond the numbers that died in this horrible event in New York City. How many American soldiers are going to die? I came of age in the 80s during the Maya Lin controversy around the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and thinking about that, like what's going to be the next memorial to our soldiers, and it all just kind of coalesced into these two projects that I'm going to share with you. And just that thinking about how in the United States we don't remember the victims of our violence. It's always this kind of valorizing of our victims or our soldiers, and I think that's deeply problematic on many levels. So just some statistics, the number of deaths on 9/11, and just some of the kind of estimates of the carnage that we wrought in Iraq. And it's disproportionate, of course. And how do you recognize this? How do you deal with this as an American, as a citizen? I kind of went at this from two angles. One, this is a project. I thought there was never going to be a memorial for the Iraqi civilians who were dying. So I thought, what if I did a call? And I created a website called IraqiMemorial.org, commemorating civilian deaths. And this was an open call to artists, architects, anybody to submit imagined proposals to the civilian casualties in Iraq. And it didn't get 5,000 entries. I ended up getting just over 200, but they were really interesting. And this became quite, I think this was significant in its own right. It attracted people like this Rashad Salim, an expat Iraqi who lives in London, proposing a kite workshop on one of the bridges over the rivers in Baghdad, to Matt Kenyon, who actually submitted a work he had created, which were he made yellow pads that with the lines of the yellow pads were microtexts of actual names of civilians who had been killed in Iraq. And he had a friend who worked at the Capitol building, which of course is in our minds right now, and had surreptitiously put these office supplies into the supplies at the Congress so that they became notepads for senators, congressmen, and everything they write goes into the congressional record. So it was this really interesting conceptual project. And it was actually one of the decisions of this project was like I started getting not proposals, but people who had done projects. And I thought, that's okay. Projects are proposals, they are these like what if kind of things. And you can go to the website, it still exists. A lot of links don't work. But it is an archive at this point of some really amazing projects. We turned these into, eventually, I had two jurors reviews where I invited curators and writers to jury the submissions, but of course there was no winner because memorial would never be built. I asked them to rate their top 10 entries, and out of those 52 total, out of these two reviews, we asked these artists and designers and architects to redesign their proposals as proposal boards the same size as those submitted for the 9/11 competition, and had a traveling exhibition of these. And this was at the Shepherd Gallery. Probably most resonant was this one at the Elizabeth Foundation for the Arts in New York City, where 2 days before the dedication of the 9/11 memorial, we had an opening and an event and performances and panel discussions. And it was a really quite amazing experience. And it's just one of the things that I do, which is kind of, the sort of activist kind of curatorial things once in a while. Although these things are loads of work, but really, really worthwhile. And I met so many interesting artists, veteran artists, Iraqi artists, and just really quite positive, to have the kind of outcome of a project like this. This was also shown in San Jose at Works Gallery. Yeah, and the other project that came out of this was a gaming-based work, and this is the website of a game that's called America's Army, and this is it was a game actually produced by the Defense Department as a recruiting and marketing tool for the U.S. Army, and released on July 4th, 2002. I remember when this came out, and I was like, wow, this is a serious game. Something needs to happen in here. And this is one of those things that sat in my mind. And after that flood of my studio, I'd had this idea well before working on that project. And I then, after the flood, really literally all I had left was my laptop, and in terms of equipment. So I went into doing this project. And what I did was, I went into this game. My avatar's name was Dead in Iraq. And instead of playing the game, you'll see what I do here. So this is the start of the match. Just backing up a little bit here. You'll see that when the match begins, I drop my weapon, and I'm usually killed straight away. But if you look at the top left of your screen, and you'll hear it as well, I type in the name, age, service branch, and date of death of each American soldier who was killed in the war. And this was a chronological
26 Army, January 12.
Chronological roll call, a way of kind of intervening in this space that is designed to draw young people into the U.S. military. They actually track the best players. This is a really sort of nefarious use of computer games in my view. This is very controversial. I found myself, constantly under attack by the other players. The reactions would be pretty standard. RIP, this is a game. And I would ignore these. I would just keep typing. I would not break character. People say, dead, please, this is not the forum to do this. I don't give a fuck. Man, will all the players go play ping pong or something? And typically, I would eventually get kicked out of a given match. And that to me was a victory, because if you can see those numbers up there, it's basically 7 out of the 8 players need, all but one, me, need to vote me to get out of a game. You can't just be kicked by 2 players. So that meant they were paying attention, and I had gotten their attention. This project, it was really pivotal. I mean, I did this between 2006 and 2011. I entered the last, I think, 100 names on December 18th, 2011, when Obama withdrew the last troops. But of course, that wasn't the end of that story, as we all know. This project, I kind of started it quietly. It started getting, people posted it on the America's Army forum and various game blogs and things. And then I started getting contacted by the press, and this piece really, I mean, it was on Salon, it was in Wired magazine. I got interviewed on CNN, NPR, all this, and quite quite intense, the scrutiny of making this work that I was really nervous about, and I found myself kind of justifying it and understanding it myself while I was doing it, while I was being attacked and supported. There were many of those who supported this project as well, but generally outside of the game. A couple of the projects related to this. During this time frame, 2008, I was awarded a commissioned residency at Eyebeam in New York City. And one of the things I worked on was this project, the New York Times, the fake New York Times, which was put out by a group of, diverse group of activists in New York City, the Yes Men, Steve Lambert, et cetera. Several of these people were working at Eyebeam at the same time, and they invited me to write an article. So this, if you don't know about this project, look it up. It's amazing. They distributed hundreds of thousands of copies of a fake New York Times printed to people as they came out of the subways in New York City. The war ends, and it's like this utopian progressive version of the New York Times, all the news we'd like to see, essentially. I did a story for the education section called Popular America's Army Video Game Recruiting Tool Canceled, and the funding would be shifted towards a new game, America's Diplomat, and actually made a home screen for the game that you could click to on that link. And if you went any further in it, it kind of revealed what it was. And I was quite curious, because this was like, it basically was saying, okay, we can make these games about killing. What if we made a game about negotiation and actually kind of working with other people? You know, why do we, you know, why not? And it was curious because actually several people contacted me and said, hey, when's this game coming out? You know, I was like, wow, yeah, it would be cool, but no, it's just it's a thought. The America's Army is a system. They have action figures, they have comic books, massive forums on their websites. So I bought some of the action figures, and then I decided to actually remake an action figure, but in reproduction of one of my screenshots. And you know, soldier who did not come back alive, as all the action figures they have are based on living people. So this is my America's Army action figure, and I show this in part because I was doing a talk like this, and it was really curious. Like I went to look for that image on the left, did a Google search for America's Army action figure, and this was the result, and which really I found quite curious. If you can see my cursor, but there's my work, 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 and I was like, oh, it's kind of this accidental intervention into the Google image search algorithm, which came into play in some later work, which I'll get to. Yeah, okay. So this project ended up leading to another project. When I was interacting and kind of defending myself online, I would oftentimes be doing this. I mean, I found, sorry, I should back up. These news stories that I mentioned earlier, there would be, you know, typically in Unsalon and things like that, there would be these comment sections, and mostly it was just people trashing, you know, just like someone should go break this guy's legs, this is so unpatriotic, and etc. And I decided to jump into that. I would sign up on, you know, to make comments, and I would use my full name, and I would go in and I would say, I'm the one doing this, and here's why. And the reasoning was to try to get into some space of dialogue with these people who are, you know, a bit similar to these Trump supporters invading the Capitol. You know, they're just like this butting heads in this way of kind of confronting each other that I think the internet kind of facilitates in a uniquely horrifying way. And I at least got to the point in several of these back and forths of understanding that we can agree to disagree. And yes, I'm a patriot, and it's my right to be doing this. I pay taxes. I'm implicated in this. They're working for all of us, etc. But in one of these back and forths, it was rather extraordinary. There was an individual and who was questioning this work, and he said, dude, you got a Gandhi complex. And I was like, what? Like, you think being like Gandhi is a pejorative? Like, I was like, kind of, thank you. And it landed up leading to a project that so in being questioned on making this work, I was doing a lot of research into the history and lineage of protest in the 20th century. And when you do that, all roads lead to Gandhi, right? I mean, to me, he was like the Marcel Duchamp of protest, right? You know, and he's amazing. And you know, and so I was reading about him and learning more about him. And I'd had an idea of doing a walking performance in a game space for some time. And it all kind of came together into a project that I did at Eyebeam in New York City, which was, I became Gandhi in Second Life. And if you don't know about Second Life, it's a massive online community that started the same time as Facebook in 2006. In 2008, it was still very popular. But there was always this rhetoric in this space that you can be anything, you know, you can be anybody. And I was like, okay, if I can be anything, anybody, what would it be like for this middle-aged white guy to be Gandhi? And I was, you know, I was nervous about it. That's definitely a questionable thing on some basic level, but I think it was quite worthwhile doing. And so I wasn't protesting anything. This was really about kind of exploring what would it be to go in a virtual space. And Second Life basically is an online space that at the time had the contiguous space the same size as the nation of Singapore. I mean, it was huge, and thousands of users online at any time. And I set this up with a Nordic Track Walk Fit treadmill where I could basically, oh, sorry, I forgot one thing. These images, that's Gandhi collecting salt at the beach at Dundee. And this is the end of his salt march. And I decided to reenact Gandhi's salt march, 240 miles over 26 days. And what I did was did it on this treadmill where the treadmill was turned into a game controller where my steps became Gandhi's steps, as you'll see in this video. And I literally, I would sleep, I would wake up in the morning, eat a huge breakfast, go to Eyebeam, and I would walk for 8 to 10 hours a day, stopping and interacting with other residents in Second Life. And it was an extraordinary experience. After the experience of being constantly attacked over Dead in Iraq and doing the Iraqi Memorial Project, both of which projects that I deeply love, but very dark work, and to go into a space in a kind of joyful sense and just be walking around as Gandhi and going into different spaces and walking up to people and offering them a gift of my walking stick and asking them to join me. And they would be like, Gandhi, what's up? And it was nice for people to want to be nice to me. And but deeper than that, I found myself transformed by the experience. It was there was something about using the body in this performance that was fundamentally different. And I found myself, basically was staring at the back of Gandhi's head, walking in this space, 8 to 10 hours a day. And then I would leave Eyebeam and I'd be walking home and thinking I could click on people, and having these deja vus where I was suddenly back inside this space. I was dreaming Second Life. I was, I had this real confusion between what was real and what was pretend. But it was a deeply transformative experience, this performance work. And at the end of the project, part of the residency at Eyebeam was to have an exhibition in their beautiful warehouse space in Chelsea. And so I worked to extract the Gandhi avatar data from Second Life, and then began working with a software called Pepakura Designer to create a papercraft version of Gandhi. And Pepakura is usually for making little desktop kind of copies of anime figures and jet planes and things using an inkjet printer. I adapted this software for large scale production. And after 6 weeks of hard labor and kind of engineering, I created a 17-foot tall reproduction of my Gandhi avatar. And I made him to be the same height as Michelangelo's David for obvious reasons. This was a really pivotal project, both in terms of the performance and I think in the making. I've always had this kind of battle between not liking being on screens all the time and wanting to actually physically touch things and make things. So I think I've found a happy medium, a way of trying to do both. And I find myself shifting back and forth constantly and combining the two. On the strength of this project, I got invited to be in this exhibition in Guangdong, China, wonderful triennial farewell post-colonialism. And they invited me to show Gandhi, and I said, oh, great, he's made in sections, we can box him up, send him over, he's big, but he's light. And they said, no, we want you to come build another one. And I was like, you gotta be kidding. But I went with it. And what was extraordinary was this was more of a collaborative experience of working with museum workers and student volunteers to actually make this piece. It was really popular in the show and landed up being acquired for their collection. On the strength of this showing, I was invited to build a third and last Gandhi for art school in Mechelen, Belgium. Yeah, so the other thing I did was I shared this on Instructables. All you artists, if you don't know about Instructables, it's really pretty amazing. It's basically a website where you can learn how to make anything and people share what they do. And I think this might have been the first example of a contemporary artist putting an artwork on there, and here's how I made this. And at the time, and this was 2008, had 55,000 views and was favorited and landed up being in a book. And it was just like sharing, because I had found out, I learned how to hack the treadmill by going to websites like this. And I thought, okay, I'm going to give back. And it was also partially the experience of being at Eyebeam, which was such a wonderfully collaborative and supportive work environment. It wasn't competitive and it wasn't backstabbing like my life at UNR. It was just fantastic. Yeah, and that's something I've done continuous in my work, and you'll see that more as we go forward. I remain very interested in shooter games. This is some work that I did called The Terrorist Other, where I was kind of fascinated by the fact that in so many contemporary shooter games, half of the Western audience were playing as being this evil terrorist other. And so I started extracting data from these games to make objects. And this is the one I'll show you, which is my Taliban hands. These are a pair of hands taken from a first-person shooter game where you can play Taliban or American soldiers in Afghanistan. And I made these. These are about 3.5 feet long, each out of white corrugated plastic. I did this on a residency in Beijing in 2011. Yeah, and it's just a way of kind of, I don't know, sort of recreating, bringing these objects into the world. And hopefully there's an aha moment when you look at the title and you're like, Taliban hands, what is this? And, you know, it opens up a kind of dialogue in a way. So you all who were at my Slide Slam thing, I mentioned a work called Project 929, which I'm not going to show tonight, but this is the work that came after this. And this is part of from visiting and really researching the Nellis Air Force Range just north of Las Vegas. This is Creech Air Force Base, which is one of the main command, control, and training centers for drones in the United States. And I became, you know, obsessed with drones pretty much around, you know, when Obama was ramping up the use of these and doing a lot of the same things Bush did in terms of, you know, denying civilian casualties and all that kind of stuff. And I just hate these things, and it just became a passion of kind of trying to do works to sort of call attention to what we were doing with these remote weapons. First project was basically kind of taking these images from the internet of various drones and going into Photoshop and putting on the word cowardly, and then saving about 25 of these images and reposting them onto the internet on Facebook, on a Tumblr account, etc. And I wanted to see if I could purposefully hack that Google search algorithm, and it actually worked. At the time, if you put in predator drone on Google image search, for about 5 years, actually, the top 12 images or so, there were 2 of my works that would come up. And I thought, okay, that's cool. So somebody out looking, you know, oh, these drones are really cool, let's check this out. And they come across this, you know, it's kind of that, what? I like that. A couple other drone projects. This is a piece I made on a residency at Autodesk in San Francisco. This is me and my Predator personal drone system. It's a Predator drone on a head display that you walk around and it follows you. You know, these are invisible generally, and it's a way to make them visible. And this was a performative walking piece actually I did in San Francisco. And this was another piece that actually I put onto Instructables, which was quite fun. And again, you know, 52,000 people looked at this. This is a non-contemporary art audience, right? That I find really valuable. And one thing too, I would invite you to go to my Instructables account and read the comments. It's just precious. It's great. And I've actually got some for you. I'll show you in a minute here. But another drone piece, this was based on, this is a still image from a video you can find on YouTube of Afghani villagers stoning a crashed Predator drone. These drones crash a lot, actually. You know, the obvious reasons they hate these things flying over their heads and dropping bombs. But I was invited by CSU Fresno State University is what I call it, but it's CSU Fresno, to work with students there in the art department to make a project. And I was making a full-to-scale reproduction of a predator drone in yellow corrugated plastic that we worked on for 2 weeks. It was intensely hard labor. And we put this onto display as if it had fallen from the sky. This was the first part of this project. We then had a performative kind of opening ceremony where we had invited Pakistani immigrants to Fresno, from the Fresno area, to read aloud from these cards. And this is the name, age, and date of death of a child who was blown up by a drone in the North Waziristan region. These cards were then handed to volunteers who then wrote this information on the surface of the drone. So it became a temporary participatory memorial. So it was a really moving project and very emotional experience. And this working with a group of people was amazing. And it was something that I think I learned from doing the Gandhi in China. Was this, like, I'd always worked by myself, and I'd done some collaborative stuff. I've actually collaborated with Russell and past things, but it's like I've always been this kind of solo artist, and there's something really magical about involving other people in the work. And I've heard from some of the students involved in this, several years later, that it was a pivotal experience in their education, and that kind of thing. And it just is a way of kind of, I don't know, to me, it's like it is this work that is theirs and mine. And that's really kind of informed a lot of my process over the years. Another cardboard project, this is a piece called Liberty Weeps that I was invited to make for a project in Los Angeles. Oh gosh, I can't remember the name of this show now, but it was in the Baldwin Hills area, and it's this group that is now called Into Action. They do these kind of temporary exhibitions throughout Los Angeles, run by a guy named Yossi Sargent. I worked for about a week with a group of volunteers, and we made this 9-foot tall cardboard Liberty Weeps that was really kind of, in a way, became a centerpiece for the show. Quite amazing to see all the selfies and things people taking in front of this. But the show, which was in a old movie theater, kind of community center in Baldwin Hills, was I think over 10 days, they had like 15,000 people through, and mostly from the African-American community. It was really quite amazing. And this work is really physical and quite rewarding, actually, because it is like building a puzzle, but not as easy as it looks. This is another work from the residency I did at Autodesk, and that residency program had one of the most amazing digital fabrication workshops in the world on Pier 9 there. And so I had access to laser cutters, 3D printing, etc. I started using a laser cutter to make these drone stamps. And the idea was essentially to distribute these to people to stamp a little green drone on their cache and then go spend it. And I gave these away at first to about 200 people, and the response was kind of amazing. Eventually, I ended up making about 3,000 of these, which I sell on a website connected to the project, but it's really just covering costs and shipping. And so people then would stamp their cash and send me a picture and go spend their cash, etc. This too, I put on as an instructable, and the comments on here. What was really fascinating was, again, this is like a nerd site. Like, you go here to learn how to make stuff. It's apolitical, all this kind of, and here I'm putting this thing on. It is very political work. And the comment section, I mean, if you read this, it's like there's this debate going on about American drone policies in the comment section. And to me, that's reaching people. That's getting a conversation started. Again, I really find that deeply kind of connective in my work. I like that. I ended up making 2 other stamps. One was Hands Up, Don't Shoot, after the shootings in Ferguson, and a Sea Level Rising. And I would I'd actually sell these as a activist rubber stamp starter kit, inviting people to kind of take that first transgressive act, if you will. I've set these up, these as sort of stamping stands in various exhibitions, New York City, various places the response has been pretty incredible. People just pull out their cash and stamp like crazy. And people have reported back to me of finding the cash in circulation, that kind of thing, which is really pretty cool. This is another drone work. I'm not going to show the thrift drones tonight. Some of you have seen these, but this is actually the precursor to the thrift drones. You don't know Albert Bierstadt's work. He's just like endemic of this kind of romanticizing of the American West in the 19th century. And I find his imagery fascinating and strange. And I created a project, and this is going to take you to a website here really quick. I made a series of GIFs or GIFs or whatever you call them. And these are essentially every Bierstadt image I could find on the internet. I put a little animated drone going across the sky. And to me, Bierstadt's work, it's all about manifest destiny. It's all about, controlling the West and dominating the West, as drones are in terms of dominating the rest of the world, right? I don't know if as Americans we have really kind of changed in many ways from who we were back in those days. And yeah, so these are kind of funny. They're a bit scary. They're familiar. I show these on monitors in gallery settings, and yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of this thing that I did that again was part of this obsession with drones. A few more pieces here. Yeah, this is just an illustration of that game Medal of Honor where I took the Taliban hands from, but this is just to give an impression. Games are usually, shooter games usually have this kind of balanced, you know, kind of two teams, both have weapons that are kind of conquerable to each other. I show this because I was invited to submit for a commission from turbulence.org in New York City. And I thought, you know, I've been doing all this stuff in computer games so long, maybe it's time I actually make a game. And so I proposed to make a game about drone warfare. But the thing about drone warfare, right, is it's asymmetrical. There's complete lack of balance, right? If you're the pilot, the drone pilot sitting in a cubicle in Las Vegas, there's absolutely no possibility of you getting hurt beyond maybe some carpal tunnel syndrome, right? But if you're on the ground beneath these drones buzzing around, you have no agency whatsoever. And how do you turn that into a computer game? It is what brought me to Dundee. I won't go into that whole story, but I ended up working with some really interesting game designers and coders, and we collaborated to create this project, Killbox. It's a two-person player. You're seeing the two different points of view here. The one is the drone pilot from above, and then on the ground, you play this ball, kind of abstracted human figure of a child. And the map is actually based on the location of an actual drone strike in North Waziristan, where a grandmother was blown up in the fields in front of her grandchildren and children. And you go through basically the process of a drone strike, and ideally you're across from each other playing, as in left, that's myself and the coder, Albert Elwin, playing the game. Ideally, we set it up in this installation where you're facing across in this sort of dark space. And what happens is you play through the drone strike, you realize if you're the drone pilot that you killed the person who's a child on the other side. And if you're the one who gets blown up, you look up and realize this person just killed me. And then the game restarts and those roles change, right? Where the drone pilot becomes the child and the child becomes a drone pilot. And it's a way to try to build a kind of empathetic kind of response to what these situations might be like. A couple other projects here, and then open up for some questions. This is actually a project I did in Los Angeles in 2008 with Pete Frostley. That's him working on the right there. And we built this for this exhibition, Into Action, in Los Angeles. And this was a response. This was a response to the mass shootings that had been going on in the States. The work was called Thoughts and Prayers. I don't think it's finished. It's actually something I'd like to stage again someday. But that's a whole other story. There's a part of this that was not included in the exhibition. We built this on site, and this was a month before the shooting in Parkland, Florida, which kind of ramped things up in too many ways. This is a website called the Gun Violence Archive, and this is, you know, some statistics of gun deaths in the United States, right? And this is a project that I made in starting in July of 2018. And what happened was after the Parkland shooting, you know, Donald Trump made a stupid comment about blaming video games for what had happened. And I work at a university that is extremely well known for video game production. And so the press contacted the university, and the university said, oh, why don't you talk to this American professor? And so I did a bit of research and found, you know, these are things you know about, but you know, when you really start looking at them, and had a conversation with a reporter about this. And, you know, in fact, there's no evidence that violent video games actually cause violence. And it's a kind of straw man argument, a way of not looking at what's actually the problem, which is too many guns freely available to too many people. And so I did a project surrounding this, and I'm not going to show the video. I usually show this video, but it's actually quite dark and probably will be would be, I think, too triggering in the current environment. But just to describe what this is, it's we took Grand Theft Auto, which is a very famous, very hyper popular game, which I didn't know before coming to Dundee was actually first made in Dundee by Scottish game designers, most of whom had never been to the United States. They actually based it on American films and that kind of thing. But it's become a huge title. I worked with a coder and we hacked this game to where it was a self-playing game, played itself 24/7, and at the same time, it scraped the statistical data of gun deaths in the United States from the Gun Violence Archive. So the Gun Violence Archive basically updates itself as gun violence happens in the United States, right? So we would take that data, feed it into the playing mechanism we made for the game, the coding, and down at the bottom of the screen, you see a number and you see a date. So on July 12th, 2018, just after the game launched, roughly halfway through the year, there were about 7,000 people who had been killed by guns in the United States. So what our project would do is at midnight Central Time, it would start at 0 and then play through the gun homicide totals from January 1st to that date. So it was an accelerated reenactment, a data visualization, if you will, using gameplay. And basically NPCs, which are non-playing characters, avatars, some armed, some not, would walk around and they would kill each other. And it was this count. It was creating this body count, a daily body count. And then at midnight, it would start again at 0, would add the figures from the previous day, and so on. This was a 24/7 live stream project on Twitch. Eventually had about 235,000 views. It was quite controversial, but it sucked people in. And I'd invite you to go. You can find us on my YouTube channel. If you go to look for DeLappe Elegy, you can see the video, but I'm not going to show it tonight just because current climate is just too disturbing as things are. But it has a soundtrack of the first recording of God Bless America, and it's a backtracking view, wandering the space. And it was an intense project to deal with. Literally, I had to live with this on my phone, tracking whether it was running on the PC in my studio, restarting it from my phone in this remote kind of way. And I lived with this for a year. And it's a way to sort of switch the debate about gun violence. It's like, no, it's not the game, it's what's happening in reality, and trying to represent that to audiences, non-art audiences, really. More recent work. This is probably one of the few things I've done during the pandemic. It's a new stamping project called This Is Not a Mask. It's sharing these masks. Actually, if you're interested in one, there is a website. You can order these. We're selling these for $5 a piece, and again, just covering the expense. This is made with a really amazing artist in Houston, Texas, Brent Richardson, and it definitely has not been as successful as the other works, in part, I think, because people are really not using cash right now for obvious reasons. But it was a way to sort of make a statement during all the craziness over the masks in the US. There's a website as well that you can go to, and you can see examples of stamped cash by people from the United States and otherwise. So yeah, last thing I'm going to talk about. I showed this slide during the Slide Slam, and I've not talked about this project to any audience yet, and so this is kind of first time talking about it. What you're looking at is a screen grab from a game called Red Dead Redemption 2, and it's made by the same company, Rockstar Games, that makes Grand Theft Auto that I just showed you previous. This is a game that's basically based in, I think it's 1898. You're in the American West, and you're this kind of cowboy character, and it's something like a cross between a spaghetti Western and a 1950s Western. And I started looking at this game after moving to Scotland about two or so years ago. First kind of wandered around this space, and I was just astounded by the landscape in this game space. The first time I went in there, I was so homesick for the Sierra Nevada, which I had lived, in Reno for so long, and just the beauty, the way they had recreated this space. It was incredible. About the same time, I was approached by a curator here in Scotland, and they actually have a competition here to see who's going to be the next artists for the Venice Biennale to represent Scotland. And he said, do you want to come up with a proposal? And I was like, wow, that's a real honor. I'd love to do that. And about the same time as getting into playing Red Dead Redemption and having these really strange experiences of kind of wandering in this virtual Western landscape, I was on a train to London and went through a small town just past Edinburgh, and didn't realize it's the home place of John Muir. And it just kind of, I was like, oh, he was Scottish. So I started doing some research on John Muir. You all know about John Muir being, the founder of the conservation movement, Sierra Club, et cetera. And, so anyway, long and short of it, I created a proposal with this curator to do a kind of a reenactive kind of walk similar to the Gandhi walk in Red Dead Redemption, but as John Muir. And we did put that forward, and then I didn't get it. I didn't get the Venice Biennale, which is fine. But in further researching this and doing readings on John Muir and things, it emerges that there's a lot of problematic stuff about this guy. He made some very unfortunate comments about Indians, Indigenous persons, and Black people. And the Sierra Club has kind of disowned him in a way, and so I was like, okay, maybe it's good this project didn't happen. But then, and this was just before all of the issues of the last year in terms of the killings of young Black men in the U.S. I started thinking, maybe this is something to look into. That actually, how to address that creatively in a work. And I know I'm sort of going into some really difficult territory with this, but I think it's necessary. So yeah, so this is just some screenshots of Red Dead. Sorry, I should have shown this prior, but it's this Western, it's an incredible game. But it's just the space to me was something really amazing. But it's also thinking differently about this space. It's like, okay, but not everybody were cowboys running around killing each other, and in fact they were doing many other things, and including John Muir wandering around freely. So I've been working with a coder, and we're trying to at this point kind of hack into the system of Red Dead to make a proper John Muir avatar. The thing is that these games all have, this. You can't make someone really thinner than this John Muir sort of prototype we have on the right, and we're trying to figure out how to hack into that system so that we can make something a little more realistic than what's on the left. But in the midst of all of this, I'm doing loads of research, including reading this fascinating book on the left, An American Genocide, the United States and the California Indian Catastrophe by Benjamin Madley. And reading John Muir's works such as Wilderness Essays. And what I have in mind is like a project that I'm loosely calling at this point The Redemption of John Muir. And I'm really interested, I grew up in California. I grew up in San Francisco, going through Catholic schools, and honestly, I don't remember us ever learning about there being Native peoples in California, right? To me, Native Americans, Indians were Plains Indians in the films and the horde representations throughout kind of film and TV experiences. And since then I've become much more conscious of this. But in reading this text, I would recommend anyone, and I think all of you being based in the Sierra Nevada at a university that is based there, this book is just it's a bit like the presentation last night, the witchcraft book that she talked about. It's shocking. Out of 150,000 estimated Indigenous persons who existed in California in 1848, by about 1873, there were 30,000 left. And there's just a history there that is, I guess what I'm getting at, and again, I'm sorry for stumbling a little bit, but this is all very new to talk about. Because in fact, John Muir could not have walked in the American West if what had happened to the Native Americans had not happened, right? Essentially, we're all implicated in this history. I'm implicated in this history, having grown up in California and experienced the Sierra Nevada, backpacked in the backcountry, and you know, not having a clue about these people who were essentially decimated, and generally with the support of the government, et cetera. I mean, it's an incredible history that invite people to. I think it's really important to look into this. So, what am I going to do? How do I address this in this game space? So, what I'm thinking about is, you know, similar to the Gandhi work of, you know, doing a performative walk, a sort of imagined kind of perhaps recreation of the distance of the John Muir Trail, which goes between Yosemite and Mount Whitney. And along the way, perhaps doing readings. This book has about a third of the text is a massive glossary that is a cataloging of the known killings of Native Americans, perhaps a reading through that as I walk, or reading other texts. Not entirely sure yet. Again, these are just ideas. But perhaps most significantly, there's a feature in this game that is quite interesting where you have a campsite, which is neutral territory. So you can't get killed there when you have a white flag flying. And what I'm thinking about is during this performative walk of inviting in Indigenous scholars, activists, artists, and historians to have conversations, to actually invite them into the game somehow, so that we all become avatars and have a conversation similar to what we're doing here, but in this kind of physical game space, and to further understand and engage this very difficult history, and see if there's some way of reconciling these very different experiences of this territory. It's probably walking into a minefield with this work, but I think that is oftentimes where you can come to some interesting places of understanding and being able to talk to each other rather than past each other, et cetera. So yeah, so that's, I mean, I can't say a whole lot more about that because I haven't done it. I think this will have to be, it sounds like a perfect during the pandemic project, but my internet connection here at the house sucks. So I really couldn't do this project from my home, and we're not allowed to work elsewhere at this point. So it's probably going to happen sometime after everything sort of clears up, but this is what is in the works. So with that, I want to say thank you. I don't even know what time it is. I guess, yeah, I'm probably right on target for an hour. Really appreciate the opportunity, and I'm really glad to open this up for questions. I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully I can see everybody again. Yeah? Okay. So I guess there's probably questions in chat and other questions. Am I right?
I haven't seen any questions pop up in the chat unless I miss them, okay. But feel free to put questions in the chat or unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, or say something. It'd be great to hear people.
Joe, did you see the CIA rebrand this week?
What's about what?
The CIA had just like rebranded themselves and like launched a new website and like this like super slick looking graphic design. I was just thinking about it as you were talking, not quite pertinent, but a lot of people were kind of roasting the CIA online for trying to present themselves as hip or edgy. It looks like a electronic music record LP.
I'll have to take a look. That sounds quite intriguing.
Just something kind of, nefarious worlds of power and aesthetics,
Yeah, cool. I definitely take a look at that. Any questions? There's a hand raised. I think is that Eliza?
Hi. Yeah. I'm just thinking about the project you were just speaking on that's really like starting to come together for you.
Yeah.
And thinking about Macon last night, talking about how her kind of method for reaching out and inviting folks to participate in her projects And I was just wondering if you could speak to, like, because I think if I understand correctly, you want to invite different Indigenous scholars or activists or participants to be in this space and hold space in this online game. And so I'm just wondering if you could speak about like what your approach will be and kind of like that tricky area around like tokenization or like being a ally or co-conspirator and how you feel like you'll be able to navigate that.
Yeah, I think that's that definitely is at the forefront of my thinking on this. I think that's a very careful process. You know, it's actually funny. I was thinking yesterday in our class, we were discussing Rebecca Solnit's Wanderlust, and one of the things she mentions is Marina Abramovich and Ule doing a project where they went to the Aboriginal outback in Australia to want to interact with the Aborigines, and the Aborigines just ignored them, you know, which kind of made me giggle. And yeah, there's always, I think, yeah. So I'm keenly aware of that. I have some, I've made some initial contacts, but mostly via some other projects. I've got a grant proposal in to do a really, hopefully this happens, but it's to fund creating games with Indigenous San people in Zimbabwe, with a university in Zimbabwe, and via that project proposal, which we're hopefully going to hear about in a week or so, whether we get funding, I got in touch with the Indigenous Futures Initiative in Canada, which is a really interesting group of Indigenous artists who are working with gaming technology and doing workshops on First Peoples and in the U.S. on reservations. And so, I mean, I think I'm really conscious of not, not being the white savior kind of idiot, but being, kind of careful and like, and I want to know what they think about this. Like, is this stupid? Is this, I don't want people to be insulted. I don't want people to feel organized, etc. So yeah, I'm going to be very careful about that. And I think I'd love to get Rebecca Solnit to come have a conversation in this space, that type of thing. I think there's loads of, I would love to actually get this author involved somehow. And that's the kind of stuff similar to Megan's talk last night that I'm really sensitive to. And some of this comes from actually, that experience of being Gandhi, which was definitely a little cheeky on my part, but also discovering after doing that project and more research coming out about how much of a, none of these people are saints, right? And Gandhi had a lot of issues, but I think, yeah, it's just, I think it's important to try to open up these spaces for dialogue. And if there's a way that I can do this that makes everybody feel respected and represented and not tokenized and not being used, but to be shared collaborators and participants, that's my goal. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, it may not happen, but I think that's I find myself most interested and engaged by ideas that make me feel really uncomfortable. Dead in Iraq was one of those. The Gandhi project was one of those. If it doesn't make me really nervous and like completely question myself and everything I'm doing, it's probably not worth doing. So that, I don't know. We shall see. And but yeah, really good question.
I also like piggybacking off of that, wonder how has a lot of your projects are critical of the US government, and how has there been a shift since you've been living outside of the US?
Yeah, it all seems even more batshit crazy from here. Is all I can say. But it's crazy here too, right? And but that is a really good question. I mean, when I moved here, you know, there was one of the reasons I moved here was a curator friend who lives here, and she's like, "So how's this going to change your work?" And I was like, "You know, I don't know. My work has been so focused on U.S. politics for so long that I suspect it will." At the time, you know, 4 years ago, I thought maybe it will start taking on a bit more of a global perspective, you know, or somehow dealing with that. And I think this John Muir project kind of does that. I mean, I didn't mention one of the things in researching John Muir and kind of the history of Scotland. There's really incredible connections between Scotland and the American West that I was aware of some. Railway workers, you know, on the Transcontinental Railway. Douglas fir trees are named for a Scottish botanist, David Douglas, who actually brought spruce trees from Sitka and the Douglas fir trees back to Scotland. Now about half of Scotland is covered with these spruce trees. You know, it's like, I mean, globalization is nothing new, right? And there's this history of like where I am in Dundee. Dundee was the center of wealth in Europe in the late 1800s, and it was because of these jute factories that made pretty much all the canvas for the sails and the covered wagons and the clothing for American slaves. I mean, you know, we are intertwined and implicated in all these things. So it's not. So yeah, it seems it's taken a bit of time, but it's like starting to see these connections between these places, and seeing that these things, I think these are ideas and issues that are worth engaging creatively, because the conversations around them can be really difficult. You know, even just talking about, you know, you look at the trashing, you know, the destruction of that statue in Bristol, which was so incredible, just opened up a dialogue here that has been really needed. There's a lot of stuff happening here in the UK around these issues. So yeah, so I mean, that's, I think, how it's starting to change what I'm doing. I think Allison had a question. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. My question is a little bit similar, but it's more about, I'm curious about the limits that you place for yourself as an artist in dealing. I mean, a lot of this work is subversive in a very Gandhi-esque way, like very silently subversive, but I also am curious. I mean, to me, there seems like there could potentially be a lot of danger in some of the big, you know, we were talking about the government, like there's a lot of things that you're putting into question that I would imagine could potentially make one feel unsafe. And I just am curious about your own tolerance for safety, physical or mental, emotional.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the America's Army project was probably the most pertinent in regard to that. I mean, I was receiving threats and, you know, that kind of stuff, and really, really hostile, you know, messages and that type of thing, which was scary, because that you know, in 2006, you know, I remember, I mean, just even questioning the war, you were at all, you know, you were considered somehow an evil, you know, unpatriotic, you know. I mean, we've gone so far in the US. I think there is such a blind worship of everything military since Vietnam that I think is really problematic on many levels. And I respect people who serve in the military. I nearly went into the military myself, and actually some of my reasons for doing Dead in Iraq come out of my experience of not doing that. And a recruiter who came to visit my house in 1981 when I graduated from high school, actually talking me out of joining the military. So I looked at that piece as a way of passing that on. But yeah, I think that was, I think, some of what I was uncomfortable with that project. But curiously, what I found with that work was the vast majority of people who were objecting to that project were not involved in the military, you know, and it tended to be yeah, I'll leave it at that. It was, you know, it was kind of a curious phenomenon, but yeah, I think I don't know. And I honestly, I think, you know, I'm sitting at a desk typing on my computer. I'm not, you know, marching and protesting and getting my head beat in by riot police. But yeah, it is those kind of projects did make me nervous, but it was also very energizing. It also felt like I was doing something important. Oh, sounds like a recording, but anyway, thanks for the question. Good question.
I think I'm next in the question line, but kind of a continuation of what you're talking about. The kind of like online engagement with discussions of works in the political sphere, and how you kind of like understand the conversations around your work, whether there's kind of like this. I'm interested, I guess, in like what you said about, you know, reading the comment section on your work. In fact, last night when I was doing some research, I was reading the comments on Steam for Killbox,
yeah,
and just kind of like thinking about how do you kind of choose to engage like you did with America's Army, and choose to allow the online conversation to operate on its own kind of whatever rules there are for online conversation. I guess I'm interested in the moment when you decided to take a hand in the online conversation, and why or when that happened.
Sure.
And
well, I mean, I think the decision, you know, the decision and the idea to do the experiment of how Elite Force Voyager was probably a first step in that direction. And I've been thinking about this today, because actually living in Reno for 27 years or so, and anyone who's been an artist living in Reno or other kind of small towns, you kind of don't exist in the art world, you know, and it was very, I honestly think one of the reasons I started doing experiments online is because it was just like, it was so difficult to function as an artist living in a community that largely did not embrace digital media. The museum there was really not particularly interested, and remains pretty much disinterested in my work. But you know, it was in some ways out of frustration, you know, and also like, what would this be like? And then seeing, you know, that you could reach potentially thousands of people with these odd online gestures. And you know, I remember having a conversation with one of my former colleagues at UNR who liked to brag about how his video works had been viewed by 6 million people in China, you know, and that he could never approach that showing in a gallery or museum. And there was some truth to that. It was something very interesting about that, and thinking about it also was about what was I trying to do as an artist? Like, what did I want to accomplish? And I think, you know, when I fully got to this position of being overtly political in my work during the Iraq conflict, it became not about, you know, being famous or selling work or any of that. It was like, okay, when I started doing political work, it was like, this is the artist I was meant to be. I feel like I felt complete, you know, in a way. And it was like the art world and the gallery world and all that was just really not particularly interesting to me, and remains not so, you know, and that you can kind of take agency and do it on your own, and kind of make things happen, which is what I did. And that it is possible, and that the internet can kind of become this platform for that. That engaging, you know, in those comments was really, really kind of scary, and doing and reading those kind of things. You have to have a thick skin, because the people's tend to be, the knee jerk tends to be really nasty in those situations. And I hope that the work and the comments that I would make back to people would be intelligent, you know, kind, considerate, and that the work is as well, you know. And I try to do that with the work, to do things that are, you know, I think Elegy is probably the darkest thing I've ever made, and it probably is, you know, it's disturbing in it, but it's also deeply engaging, and some people have found it oddly sort of I don't know, just you can't stop watching it, you know, and it touches people as well, and moves them, and that's, I think that's, you know, if I can do that every once in a while, that's great. But that connecting with audiences, I mean, one of my favorite things having an exhibition is being at an opening and talking with people about the work. You know, I love doing these lectures for the same reason, right? You're engaging, and I don't make the work. I mean, I make the work partially for myself, but it's I don't think art is complete until you share it and people react and you get feedback. And, you know, it is about creating a dialogue. When you put brush to canvas or, you know, click a picture, it's that you're making something to show and to share. So yeah, I don't know. I value those kind of back and forths. Like even in Elegy, I didn't mention this, but and as you know, Mary, the comment section in on Twitch is something of its own. I do wish there was a better way to archive it, but that was, I think, the first month and a half of that project was just, you know, responding to gamer kids who were coming and they were like, what the fuck is this? Why are you, you know, what you know, we're always attacked over violence. Why are you making it worse? And then getting in a conversation with these gamer people about, it's like, no, think about it. I'm reflecting something back that is actually real, where what's happening in the game is actually fantasy and pretend, and drawing a line between the two. And, you know, so yeah, I love that. I you know, that it means you're reaching, I mean, how many, you know, I don't know what the proportion is of people who actually go into museums and galleries to see artwork, but, you know, it's probably something about along the lines of the number of people who actually read a book every year. You know, it's like, and I think to be able to reach people in these kind of contexts, in comment sections or on Instructables or Twitch, yeah, that's great. I think it's important to do. Thanks for the question. And thanks for the lovely introduction as well. Appreciate that. See some suggestions for some books in the chat, but no questions. Is there?
Yeah, Joe. This is Chris Lanier. Really nice to hear your voice.
Oh, hi, Chris.
Yeah, excellent talk as always. You know, the question I wanted to pitch you is sort of a reaction. You know, I would think one thing, as somebody who's been involved in the internet as a web designer and artist for a long time, is it has really felt in the past decade or so that the internet has really leaned into becoming a disinformation machine, right? That at the advent of the internet, you know, there was like, oh, hey, people have access to information. People could certainly kind of buttress themselves into sort of their own sort of self-selected fantasy version of reality, you know, because there's not this kind of curator who's deciding what is true and what is false. But it seemed like there's two kind of contending possibilities in the internet in terms of information as a potentially liberatory, the access to information being potentially liberatory, or disinformation kind of flooding out actually kind of factually derived reality. And I'm wondering if you two have kind of felt this kind of acceleration of the online spaces being disinformation spaces, and what thoughts you might have in terms of how artists can react to or intervene in that.
Yeah, I think about that quite a bit, and it brings to mind, you know, like, I mean, the America's Diplomat project, I think, is a good example of maybe what would be my approach to that, in a way, is that it gives itself away eventually, right? I mean, if you click on any of the links in that fake game stream, it takes you to a blog that says, this is a conceptual project, blah, 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 and give me your comments. What do you think about this? So it's not a straight up lie. I think, but I do think about that quite a bit, because like particularly I think about like the work of the Yes Men, you know, and what the incredible work they've done. I'm not sure their work would resonate in the same way today, because so much of what we're facing are these kind of fake kind of creations and things. So yeah, it's I don't know. That's a very good question. I struggle with that and really kind of curious how to confront what has become of this monster that is the internet. And as I said at the start of my talk, I've always been really skeptical of these things, and from God, I mean, it's been kind of fascinating in a way, because I've sort of, you know, come of age doing all this stuff during the first wave of VR that was going to change the world and everything was going to be amazing and all this kind of stuff, and the internet was going to make everything amazing and free and you know, and you know, there's just so much bullshit that goes around surrounding these things that you just have to try to see through it and keep, I think, trying to push against it and do things that, you know, that draw attention and hopefully create intelligence. I guess I don't know, but it is the internet is a uniquely bizarre and scary place at the moment. Not sure how this is all going to play out, but just yeah, I don't know. I think loads on what you're bringing up here, and I don't really have an answer at this moment.
Yeah, I don't think anybody does. I was hoping, you know, I was hoping you'd have an answer that would just solve the whole problem.
We're working on, you know. Yeah, so maybe that's a larger project, I guess. Any other questions?
Do we have any final questions for Joseph before we kind of wrap up the official public part of this? Okay, well, as ever, make sure you come back for more of our public programming. Tomorrow at 5:15 Pacific Standard Time, we have Rodney Ewing who will be talking with us. And then we'll be starting up lectures again on Monday evening.
Okay, I'm sorry, it's at 2:30 tomorrow, Rodney's talk.
2:30, sorry, Walter's 5:15. I'm reading my side and skipped a line. Thank you, Julia. Tomorrow's 2:30 Pacific Standard Time.
Can I say one last thing? I really appreciate you doing this at a reasonable hour, so I kind of have a brain still. It's a good thing.
Absolutely. And yes, I see there's a question about a recording. A recording will be available on our Sierra Nevada University YouTube channel in a couple days once I'm able to download and upload all of those things.
Awesome.
Okay, if we can all thank Joseph for his time today and sharing with us all this amazing artwork. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Really awesome to do this. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I hope to see everyone in the flesh in Tahoe one of these days. We shall see.
Yes, very much. Thanks, Joseph. See you, everybody.
Thanks. See you tomorrow.